Hello, everyone, and welcome to Chalkbeat's annual legislative preview. I'm Melanie Asmar, Bureau Chief for Chalkbeat Colorado. Chalkbeat is a nonprofit news organization covering the story of education in America. That work includes chronicling decisions made by state lawmakers that impact the lives of teachers and students, which is why we're so happy to host this yearly conversation about education issues that are likely to surface in the upcoming legislative session. Be sure to sign up for Chalkbeat's free email newsletter if you haven't already to continue following our coverage of the legislative session. We'll put a link in the chat box. I also want to mention that this conversation will be recorded and emailed to all attendees afterward. The chat box is closed, but please use the Q&A box on Zoom to submit any questions for our panel or to let us know about any technical issues. I'd like to offer a special thanks to our event partner, the Colorado Education Association, and thank you to our event partner, Young Invincibles. Now I'll turn it over to our co-moderators, Jason and William, to introduce themselves. Jason?
Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Jason Gonzalez. I am the higher education and legislative reporter for Chalkbeat Colorado. This is one of my favorite events of the year, part of it because we are able to really elevate the voice of young students who are interested in the policy world. And so I'm really excited to have William on the Zoom with us as a moderator. Here he is. William?
Hi, my name is William. I am currently a junior at the University of Colorado Denver, studying public health. I am on the youth advisory board at Young Invincibles, and I'm super excited to be here. A couple of my experiences: I am a 2024-2026 Obama Chesky Voyager Scholar, along with a 2022 Bachelor Scholar. Uh, yeah, and I'm grateful to be here.
All right. So thank you so much, William. We are going to get started. We are missing a couple folks here. And so I'll just I'll have Caroline reach out and see if they can jump on here. So first off, we'll start with a question for everyone. Each of you are going to get a set time limit for each of these. So the first is in 1 minute each. If you could, oh, sorry, I'm not introducing anyone yet. The panelists today are Joint Budget Committee Chair Senator Jeff Bridges, and we're going to send out some information to him so he can get on here. Then the other is Joint Budget Committee member Senator Barbara Kirkmeyer, a Republican representing Weld County.
Yeah. And we also have House Assistant Majority Leader Jennifer Bacon, who's a Denver Democrat, House Majority Whip Matthew Martinez, who's a Democrat from Monte Vista, and Representative Lori Garcia Sander, a freshman lawmaker and Republican from Eaton.
All right, so now we'll jump into the round table. So each of you get a minute each, and so we're going to start with all of you. We're going to do a quick lightning round. So panelists, in a few sentences, tell us about your top two education priorities for this session. Representative Bacon, we'll start with you.
Hi, I'm trying to figure out why my camera is not on. Can you see me?
Nope.
No. Can you
Cannot.
hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Well, maybe I'll just speak until my camera comes on. Well, thank you all very much. Excited to be here. Also looking forward to discussion. My name is Jennifer Bacon. I represent Colorado's House District 7. Oh, there I am. Sorry. Which is the far northeast corner of Denver. My top two issues this year will be continuing to look into school finance, as well as really digging into anti-discrimination work that can be done in K-12.
All right, Senator Bridges, we'll go with you next.
Hi, my number one priority this year is making sure that we don't backslide on the funding that we committed to last year. We eliminated the BS factor. It's critical that we don't reinstate the BS factor. I also am very committed to making sure that the new funding formula that we worked on last year is implemented. It is the first update that we've had in many, many, many years, and it makes sure that we are funding students at the level that they need to actually achieve the goals that we have here in the state. Now, there's also a study that says, well, what is actually adequate funding? I think that's another conversation. We'd love to move forward with that, but for sure, no reinstating of the BS factor is my number one goal.
Yeah, Senator Kirkmeyer.
Well, Senator Bridges stole my thunder, so
Sorry, Barb. It's a good one.
Senator Bridges and I sat next to each other on the Education Committee for a couple of years there, my first 2 years. So we're both in step on ensuring that we do not return back to a budget stabilization factor. It took a while for us to get to eliminate it. We were there when we did it. And, so just want to make sure we do not go back to the budget stabilization factor. Also, sitting on the Joint Budget Committee, it's our job to make sure that we don't backslide and that we don't decrease actually this year education funding by looking at trying to unilaterally change the formula that was established in 1448, the new formula that was established in 1448. As I stated at the Joint Budget Committee, that needs to go through the School of Finance and through the Education Committees and have adequate debate on the floor. And the governor doesn't get to do that unilaterally through the budget. So make sure on that. And again, making sure that we have sustainable funding. Right now in 1448, there was a provision. Okay.
If you want, go take about 10 seconds, 15 seconds to finish that thought.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we can sustain any funding that we put towards education and that, again, that we don't backslide at any point.
All right. And Representative-elect Sander.
Thank you, and thanks for hosting us. So I'm the freshman here on the panel, it looks like, new legislator. And like others have said, my priority, let me back up. I just retired after 25 years in public education as a teacher, principal, and district administrator, and I still get to work 1 day a week for my district up in Northern Colorado. And so making sure that we fully fund K-12 education is a priority for me. And my other priority is local control. I will always advocate for decisions to be made at the most local level possible because those affected are the ones who should be making decisions. So that'll be my second priority. Thank you.
All right, and then I see Representative Martinez has joined us, so we'll end with you. If you hear the question, have about a minute, just tell us your two education priorities.
I'll sound like a broken record. I will say that my first priority is making sure that we don't go back into a budget stabilization factor, and making sure that we're preserving the funding with all the hard work that we're doing, and then also make sure that we're still preserving what we did with the new School Finance Act. That was a really big benefit to rural Colorado, and making sure that they get the funding that they haven't previously had, and being able to see what really great things that they can continue doing.
Thank you so much. This is another lightning round question for everyone that has generated a lot of interest from the audience. State lawmakers may have to make deep cuts to Colorado's $16 billion budget this session. How might the cuts affect education? Which programs might end? What do you want to keep? You'll each have 1 minute to answer. Senator Bridges, we'll start with you.
Sure. Senator Kirkmeyer referenced sitting next to each other on the Education Committee. I've been on the Education Committee every year that I've been in the legislature until I came onto the Budget Committee, chaired the Senate Education Committee. So education is the number one priority for me. I think it's the most important thing we do as a state. So preserving as much as we can in this horrific budget situation we're in. We have to cut about $1 billion out of a $16 billion budget. This is going to be an extraordinarily difficult task. We have so many grant programs. I'm not sure that they're all doing what it is that we want them to do. We're looking at that within education, but more importantly, we're looking across government to see what it is that we can cut It is a prioritization process. The budget reflects our values, and this year more than any, it's really going to be a statement about what we value more than other things. So Senator Kirkmeyer and I are working extraordinarily hard in difficult situation to cut as much as we possibly can out of everywhere else in the budget before it gets to any kind of cuts to K-12.
Thank you, Senator Bridges.
The grant
Senator
programs are a
Kirkmeyer?
target.
Senator Kirkmeyer?
Thank you. So yes, we have a constitutional requirement to fund education, and we have a constitutional requirement to increase it by inflation. So my goal is to ensure that we meet our constitutional requirement and fully fund education under the Constitution. That's the first goal. The second thing is with regard to cuts in the Department of Education, there's about $81 million worth of grant programs that are there that don't appear to be that equitable. In fact, the Department of Education gave us a survey that showed that they're not really sure where all the funds are going to. Well, they know where the funds are going to, and they're going to a limited number of school districts. So I think we've all talked about it at the Joint Budget Committee during the committee process, that those are areas where we are likely going to look for some cuts in the Department of Education. We are at least $700 million in the hole right now in a structural deficit. And so every department needs to be looking for where we're going to make cuts.
Thank you, Senator Kirkmeyer. So Representative Martinez?
Same thing. I'll just echo what they're saying. I think that, we all have to look at all the departments and being able to look at an equitable cut back on that, but then also making sure that we are preserving really the hard work that we're doing. And I'll add one caveat, because we haven't talked about this yet, is for higher education funding for our rural institutions as well too. They deal with a different scenario. They're on a different playing field. And so being able to really work to preserving their funding as well too, because they're already operating on a shoestring budget, and any cuts are going to be into the bone that they're doing as well too. But we will also value what they bring to the table and making sure that their students are being taken care of as well too. And that's one of my priorities.
Thank you. Representative Bacon?
I want to just echo what Representative Martinez shared. I'm curious what the impacts will be to higher ed. Plus, we've spent a lot of time, we're still trying to sift through the blur space, which has showed to be very popular amongst our students. I also want to be sure, as well as we look at the cuts, that we don't underestimate or misunderstand programs that might be critical for equity and accountability and enforcement. One area is special education. Another area is around, some of the anti-discrimination work that we've been doing.
Thank you. Representative Garcia Sander?
So having been a principal through the BS Factor years, I totally understand how important it is that we fully fund K-12 education. So that's a priority. I also always ask people, do you have a checking account or a personal bank account that you have to watch your pennies on? Because I know I do. And so having been a principal and having to make some cuts or make hard decisions on what programs are necessity and what programs are nice to have, but can't afford those this year, that's a reality. And so, not having the background and experience that others on this panel have, I am just going to be asking a lot of questions around, grant programs. What have we funded? I know COVID money paid for a lot that has come on in the last few years, and that's not continuing. And so there's a lot of questions that I have around what can we cut, and is it a necessity or a nice to have?
And thank you, everyone. So we'll get into some in-depth questions here. These next ones are for Senators Kirkmeyer and Bridges. So you have about 2.5 minutes each, and it'll probably take that much time for this one. So Governor Jared Polis's budget has, even after amendments, has kept changes to the way schools are funded based on enrollment, and the way that some districts with declining enrollment would get less money. Does the JBC support these cost savings measures? Why or why not? Senator Kirkmeyer, we'll start with you.
Thank you. So first of all, I don't support the governor's request. He wants to get rid of, I call them ghost kids. I know y'all call them phantom kids, but I think they're just ghosting us and don't want to come anymore. But anyways, no. And that's what I was starting to talk about in the first question. You know, the school finance formula, there were changes made in 1448. It went through, you know, I don't know how much stakeholder process, but it went through a process at least where it was debated in both chambers. And that's what I was saying. The JBC isn't going to be making that decision, at least not from my perspective. I won't be supporting a bill that changes that. It needs to go through the School Finance Formula Act and the School Finance Formula. And it needs to have adequate debate on the floor, and everybody needs to have the opportunity, including all the stakeholders that are involved in it, as well as to what goes on with regard to, do we change that trend? I know in the 1448, it went from 5 years to 4 years. And the governor's proposing basically 0 years. And, you know, we don't get to substantially change law like that through a budget kind of cycle. So I think it needs to go to both chambers for adequate discussion. I think too, and I don't know if you're going to ask us this later, but trying to increase $120 million approximately in this year, which is what it is in that 18% approximately for school finance, is going to be tough. And I don't see how we do it and be able to maintain that and keep a balance in our state education fund that, you know, makes me feel confident that we will never get back to a budget stabilization factor.
Senator Bridges?
Thank you. So if you look at the state budget as a whole, I mentioned the $16 billion general fund. A third of that is Medicaid investments. A third of that is K-12 investments. Another about 15% is prisons and higher ed. So if we're looking at cutting $1 billion out of $16 billion, I don't know how we manage to do that without impacting in some way the investments we make in Medicaid and the investments we make in K-12. We are doing everything we can to avoid that, if at all possible. And you have the most pro-education joint budget committee that you have really ever had in the state's history. And so that's our focus. That's our goal. If we have to choose, for me, if we have to choose between adequately funding the students we have or funding districts for students they don't have, I'm going to side with the students that actually exist every single time. And so we have a funding formula that is better than what it has been, that doesn't provide the funding that I think we all know we need to really accomplish what it is that we want our schools to accomplish in the state, but that more equitably distributes the money that's available to make sure that low-income kids, English language learners are getting the funding that they need, that those kids are receiving the funding they need to thrive and achieve. And so we are talking about the phantom student piece is, do we average attendance for schools over a 5-year period or a 4-year or a 3-year or a 2-year period, or do we just fund the students they have right now? My guess is that we'll end up somewhere along that spectrum, but no other state in the country funds districts with a rolling average of 5 years. We are a dramatic outlier on that. And so if we're talking about adequately funding students that exist or dropping down that averaging a few years to make sure that we can fund those students, I'm all in favor of making sure that we are adequately funding the students we have.
Has there been an alternative at this point talked about, whether it's, you know, like the lesser of one or the other, or dropping that down, like you said, 5 to maybe 3 or 2, just to lessen that blow to districts? I'm really curious what the ideas have been floated at this point.
Yeah, all of the ideas have been floated. There's been no final determination on this, and you know, we're having those conversations. We're doing our best to figure out. For me, at the end of the day, it's what's the impact on kids, and I love our districts. I love our teachers. At the end of the day, adequately funding the students that we have, making sure the teachers who teach them are paid what they deserve, that those districts have the resources they need to educate them. I mean, that's the critical thing for me. And if you drop it down to just 1 year, I think there are some really bad things that happen with districts holding back money and not investing it because they're not sure what it's going to be next year. But if we can lower that averaging sum to get some savings in the budget to adequately fund what it is that we have, I think there's a conversation to have there.
Yeah, and I would agree. There's definitely a conversation to have, and there was a conversation that was had during the last the 24th session. So we're all making a very strong case for why the School Finance Act should be done before the budget. Because again, there needs to be adequate debate. This isn't the governor gets to walk in after a bill's been signed, after all the debate that occurred on 1448 in both chambers, and say, look, we're going to change the finance formula, because that's what's being suggested done. I don't think it's appropriate for the Joint Budget Committee to do that. So again, I've said this for the last 2-3 years, we need to get the School Finance Act in place prior to closing out the budget. So we're not having this discussion after the fact when we're already looking at how much money we don't have.
All right, thank you both. Well, so for the next question, this is about 2.5 minutes each for both of you, Representative Bacon and Representative Garcia Sander. With the sorry, I'm on the wrong one. Actually, this is for Representative Garcia Sander and Representative Martinez. Last week, the state released an adequacy study that showed we needed billions more for K-12 education. As lawmakers in rural parts of the state, how would this type of investment impact schools in your communities?
You want me to go first? I haven't had a chance to read through that full impact report. I've just skimmed the first page or two, actually. So I need more time to read through that. My communities in House District 65 cover the gamut from rural to suburban, and we've got title schools, we've got high performing, high SES schools, and everything in between. I think there's, again, the nice to have, the wish to have, the want to have, and then the reality. And so I'm going to withhold making any kind of statement or judgment on what that means, because I think we're not going to be able to have the nice to have and wish to have and want to have this next year. So that's where I'm at with it. Thanks.
Representative Martinez.
I want to go back into what we've had in the last year or two, as far as funding and really where we're trying to prioritize. You look at, I represent House District 62, which is predominantly rural areas with parts of Pueblo, and we've had significant needs. And I feel like, when we were talking about the new School Finance Act this last year, and we were talking about where the money was going in the state, and quite frankly, for the last 30 years, it hasn't gone into the rural parts of the state that need it the most. And so, we talked about this on the floor, is saying that, when you have school districts that the same teacher is driving the bus that's coaching the wrestling team, and then also still trying to clean up, they've made do with what they've had. So again, sound like a broken record, but having, preserving the funding that we've already set aside, and making sure that these areas that have made do for the last 30 years, a generation's worth of kids, get the funding that they need to, so that they can continue to improve, I think is absolutely paramount. Because I think, I'm very interested to see where these school districts can go now that they do have a little bit more funding than what they had before, and being able to do right by their students, and really seeing the success stories that can come out of rural Colorado.
And this is a follow-up for anyone who wants to answer this, but I mean, what's the solution here to, in that adequacy study, it calls for billions. What's the solution here to raise that kind of money for schools?
I think, I'll take my first stab at this. I think it's really making the investment, putting pen to paper and saying that this is something that we care about, and not using it as a bargaining chip like that's happened in years past. And like I said, we started that conversation last year, being able to do that. Great work from the JBC and all that they're doing for advocating for this kind of funding as well too. But that's step one. And I think, change doesn't happen overnight, and especially for something like this. But I think as long as we can continue to say that this is a priority for the state, this is a priority doesn't matter between urban and rural, but we need to continue to make progress on this, however difficult it may be.
Yeah. Thank you so much. For this next question, you will all have a 2.5.
I'm sorry, can I just add a little bit to that before you move on from school finance? Is that okay?
Yeah, sure. Sure.
And I just wanted to say, I want to thank our JBC members here, because it's interesting for me, who is not on JBC, to be able to hear what you all are talking about. And also as a co-sponsor of 1448, I do think that it's important to note our context here in Colorado, and I don't want us to use them as political points nor ignore them. And so even though we're talking about, for example, we may be the only state that does averages, we are also a state that has particular limitations on how much revenues that we can bring in that other states do not have. We're also talking about eliminating the BS factor, which, and I will tell you, having sat on the state's largest school district, even with the $1 billion budget, even though we're talking about ghost students or students that are not here, when we talked about stabilizing our budget and the BS factor, it was to 1989 levels into budgets where school districts expected to have averages, you know, and those dollars as a part of the formula. And so to say we want to protect the BS factor, but also say then we want to change averages does change the status and changes the formulas that school districts were trying to figure out how to navigate through. We also did have a series of legislation and bills to talk about state and local share when it comes to funding K-12. And so all of those things are critical to think about. What the adequacy studies do is tell us what does it take to fund what it is that we said and committed to funding here in the state. And we are woefully, woefully below those levels. And so within this context, we need to think about not just today in this budget cycle, but the next 2 to 4 to 6 years of what will it take to think about how we bring in revenues and to meet the needs of what it said, of what we said we will fund. And we need to also have critical conversations with our local school districts as they are also trying to balance the local share, which has been impacted by state share and the commitments we've made around property taxes. And we need to understand where local communities can afford and cannot afford to do things, whether it's through mill levy or bond. And so I didn't want us to, yes, we have a tough budget year. Yes, we are talking about protecting the BS factor. Yes, we are talking about 1448, but we also need to be talking about our revenue constraints and what we need to critically think about as a state if we want to address those things, because our context is not the same as other states across the country. And so I'm hoping as part of, you know, as a legislator, I have been talking to some CFOs and to some other legislators on what is it that we need to understand about this context and how do we collectively have an idea of what we should be doing over the next 5 years.
You know, I would like to add something in, if I may.
Yeah.
Because here's what I find amazing. So I've been a state senator now. I'm going into my 5th legislative session. So for 4 years, I've sat in my first 2 years, I sat on education. I didn't even know what the School Finance Act was in 2021, but I do know what it is now. But for 3 years, I pushed amendments to the budget that we fully fund education as required under the Constitution. And my friends on the other side of the aisle kept saying no. They kept telling me, no, we can't do that because we just don't have the money for it. So it was actually in 2023, and it was myself and Senator Lundeen that pushed the amendment through that, first of all, bought down the $321 million budget stabilization factor that we had going down to 140 million approximately. And we also pushed through the amendment that said we will eliminate it in the 24 session. So it wasn't the Joint Budget Committee, it wasn't the governor, it wasn't a whole bunch of other people. It was that amendment in that 23 School Finance Act that said we will eliminate it in 24. And thank you to the JBC, and Senator Bridges is on there with me when we did this. We did eliminate it, and we followed the statute, and we followed the will of what not only is the will of the people, but the will of our General Assembly and what they passed into law. So what is beyond me, though, is for my experience, for 4 years, I was told, we just can't fund education. We got to keep balancing our budget on the backs of students. And then all of a sudden, because we get it eliminated, the next year, the very next year that, well, actually the same year that it's actually eliminated, we have a bill that comes in and increases the amount of money going to education. And it's beyond me how we flipped, how my colleagues, my friends on the other side of the aisle flipped in that year and said, oh, well, we couldn't prioritize it the year before. And now we need even more money for it. We are in, I'm just going to give you a budget reality right now. We are in a structural deficit. We are in a year over year overexpending our state budget to put us in a structural deficit. We have to cut that general fund operating budget, and it's actually larger than 16 billion a little bit, but we have to cut that budget and get it in shape before we can sit here and try and figure out where we're going to fund other people. Because right now, for the last 3 hours, 2 hours, whatever it was, Senator Bridges and I sat here and listened to all about Medicaid and CHIP Plus and getting healthcare providers the money that they need to provide resources to our poorest of the poor, our lowest income folks, people in rural Colorado, in downtown Denver, wherever it is, to get the funding for that. So everybody is coming in. Senator Bridges told you 2/3 of our budget. 1/3 education, 1/3 is healthcare policy and finance. That is basically $10 billion right there, or over $10 billion right there, that we have to figure out how to fund this year with a structural deficit where we know we are at least $700 million to more, a billion probably more in the hole that we have to climb our way out of. That's the budget reality.
Thank you so much. Like I said, this is one of those conversations we could probably spend the whole entire time on. So we're going to move on from this. William, go ahead with our next question.
So the next question, you will have 2.5 minutes to each to answer the question. This question is for Representative Bacon and Representative Garcia Sander. With the upcoming administration's plan to roll back policies that once barred ICE raids at schools, many undocumented students and their families now fear attending school, accessing healthcare, and even participating in community activities. As a student and an immigrant, I've seen how this climate of fear affects attendance and academic success. What steps will you take to ensure that Colorado schools remain safe spaces for all students, regardless of immigration status? Will you support state-level sanctuary schools policies to prohibit immigration enforcement on school grounds? You'll each have 2.5 minutes to answer. Representative Bacon, we'll start with you.
There's a lot there. So what I'll start with is we have heard from our constituents and folks across the state on how we value public education and what that means to the health of our state. If students are not in a place where they feel safe or that they're confronting trauma, it impacts educational outcomes. And so I'd like us also actually to start talking about this component of students' mental health as part of school safety. We talk a lot about law enforcement and SROs, but we don't talk about what students need to feel confident and secure in school. So as a Democrat and as the Assistant Majority Leader and a representative of the majority party, we don't necessarily have anything on the books right now for sanctuary schools. However, we have passed laws, and we do expect that those who have sworn to uphold those laws will uphold Colorado laws. And right now, our laws say we do not share data, we do not engage in immigration work that is reserved for the federal government, and therefore we will expect that those laws and rules are upheld and that we do it in the interest of providing that confidence and safety for our young people, regardless of their immigration status at school. We have spent a lot of time in this state also talking about the contributions of those who come to us and who are new arrivals or new Americans, whether it is through the support in transitioning into trying to figure out how to acclimate to school, to getting folks to go to college with the asset bill. And so at the end of the day, I do know that the majority is interested in upholding and strengthening those laws and being sure that we can also talk about safety in a way that talks about security and what it means for families when they encompass and experience different things.
Thank you, Representative Bacon. Representative Garcia Sander.
Thank you. So ultimately, I believe we just need to follow the laws that are in place, right? A lot of my career has been working with multilingual learners. I've been an ELD teacher, and I currently am an ELD ML director in my school district near where I live. And so, I think so much of the conversation is around political media. In my districts where I've worked in Thompson, Poudre School District, Alt Highland School District, and where I live in Eaton, there's very much a culture that we protect our kids and we protect them from what's going on outside of school. And so, rarely will it come up where I've had a student either in elementary, middle, or high school that has concerns, but there's a culture in the districts where I've worked where we reassure students, your job is to come here to school. We're going to teach you no matter what. We support you no matter what. We'll get you what you need no matter what. Let the grown-ups take care of the grown-up stuff, and we're going to take care of you here at school. So, ultimately, there's a culture of supporting kids at school while they're there. As far as creating, what was the second part of the question around sanctuary status for districts? Or
Will you support state-level sanctuary school policies to prohibit immigration enforcement on school grounds?
I guess I need to know more information about that. don't know if there's been legislation regarding that before. So I just have a lot of questions. I'd need to know more about what that would look like. Thank you.
Thank you so much. The next question will be 2 minutes each. This question is for Senator Bridges and Senator Kirkmeyer. Colorado doesn't have enough money for its program that provides free school meals to all students. An advisory group suggested ways to cut costs. How are you going to continue to fund this program? Will you have to cut it back? You'll each have 2 minutes to answer. Senator Bridges, we'll start with you.
Food for kids. That's the bill that was the referendum that went to the voters of Colorado had a lot of extraneous things in it, and they were all important and wonderful and great. And we don't get nice to haves this year. We really don't get nice to haves moving forward because we're at the Tabor cap, and every year we're going to have a limit that increases only by population plus inflation. When medical costs, which again is a third of our budget, go up way higher than inflation, when building costs go up higher than inflation, when wage growth goes up higher than inflation, we have a gap between what the Tabor cap will let us spend every year and what it is that we actually need to spend just to maintain the same services that we provided the year before. So all that other stuff, I don't think that's going to get funded. And I know there's a lot of people watching this who are going to be shaking their fist at me on this, but look, it's food for kids. Food for kids was the core of that question to voters. It's the most important thing that we can do from that question. And frankly, kids that are hungry can't learn. We've got a principal here who I'm sure can back me up on that. Kids that are hungry can't learn. And so we want to make sure that every kid in the state has that opportunity and that every kid is well fed and learning what they got to learn at school.
Thank you. Senator Kirkmeyer.
Did he answer the question?
We're going to fund it. It's just, that's one of the things we're going to fund. That's the answer, right?
I mean, you didn't say it at
What's
what
your
level.
answer?
We will look at it. But, quite frankly, I'm pretty disappointed in the folks that last year we told them that we funded it and made up the difference in the state education fund and use that. And, folks, when you look at the state education fund or you look at general fund, they're both interchangeable. It's the same dollar. It just gets put into a little bit different pot. But it all comes from income tax or sales tax, or no, it all comes from income tax, which is basically general fund. So, you know what? We told them to come back with some ideas, and they actually didn't come back with anything other than we just need more money. And again, we're in a very, very tight budget year. We have to cut. So they need to be looking at means testing it. They need to be looking at where is it a block grant type thing, because there are some children that I get it. I agree 100%. I have 6 grandchildren right now that are in that age. They're all boys. And yes, if they don't get food, man, it's bad news all the way through the rest of the day. So they do need to eat. But at the same time, there are some kids that are getting these meals that, their parents can afford to pay for the meal themselves. And we can make the program work for everybody else. So they actually need to come back, the Healthy School Meals folks and the Department of Education, with some ideas about where we can actually fund that within the ballot initiative that they passed. They said, all this is going to pay for this. Well, it doesn't. They said it was going to pay for stuff, and it doesn't. So they need to get it figured out, and they need to come back with some tangible responses to what we asked them last year. We gave them a year to get it figured out, actually a year and a half to get it figured out. They need to come back with some tangible responses and some tangible goals that we can actually meet, because again, we've got a huge budget structural deficit that we have to meet this year.
Thank you guys so much. For this next question, we'll be asking Representative Bacon, Representative Martinez, and Senator Bridges. You have 2 minutes each. So Colorado has commissioned a series of reports on how to improve college and career readiness. The most recent reports call to end or realign the Ascent program, which allows students to stay in high school for a 5th year to take college classes. What is the future of these programs, the PWR programs as they're called, and specifically as well as Ascent? So we'll start with Representative Bacon.
I'm sorry, was your question, what is the future of Ascent, or
what do you see as the future of Ascent, and what do you see as the future of these PWR programs?
Well, I think the PWR programs are very current for us in regards to assessment of what is the function and purpose of K-12. As you know, I sponsored a few bills along with Senator Bridges on investigating and finding greater efficiencies to protect the blur space. And that's what we're talking about here. How do folks get credits for post-workforce readiness while they're in high school? The rural communities, I've been to school districts across the state. They really love this. They also love these types of programs as ways to connect young people to the workforce in their own communities. And so, as I said when we opened, I do think there's room to find efficiencies and to be sure the programs are working in the way that we hope that they will work, and they effectuate or support the communities that we're actually targeting, which was that question with Ascent. So Ascent is a worthy endeavor, and it should be, in my opinion, protected along with some of the things that we've done around asset. If you remember, the asset bill was, how do we get students credit while they're in high school to get their associates? And so again, just to wrap up, we have to figure out how to make it work well, and with their right accountability, but it is something that we should continue to invest in. The conversations that will come from this later, that are coming now, but a little bit later, in the K-12 space is, how do we help young people become actualized and great thinkers and folks who can contribute to community, as well as getting them for workforce? But if we move too far to one space, there are some people concerned that we'll start tracking and just start recreating vocational schools, and certain people get certain degrees where others are not given the opportunity to think broadly and prepare for four-year degrees. So college is still worth going to, and it is also okay to get a credential and even an associate's. And so we had to be sure that our landscape allows for all of that and allows for all of that equitably.
Representative Martinez.
Yeah, I'm just going to actually piggyback off of what System Majority Leader said. I think, keeping the options open as much as possible and allowing the student to choose what is best for them is really what's here. I mean, I'm a product of a four-year institution. A lot of people are, but some people aren't. And so, but I think having those programs and really investing in what we're doing for those kids, and being able to have, credit for concurrent enrollment, for having pathways, but again, making sure that they're picking and choosing what they want, I think is really the main goal. And I think that there's a lot of space that we can improve in those areas, and then also being able to really work on like internships and other programming available that are built into the courses, because a lot of people don't or have the opportunity to do internship programs, but don't have the money to do so because if they're working full time, they can't take that time off to be able to do that. So I think really working on improving that, and really having, again, the student being able to pick really what path is best for them, I think is really going to be beneficial.
And then Senator Bridges, I ask you this because part of Ascent is a money question.
Thank you. And I've actually been working on this since day one in the legislature 8 years ago. Senator Lundin and I have been saying that every kid should graduate from high school with an associate's degree, a meaningful certificate, or an internship that leads to a good paying job, right? The question is, how do we make sure that high school grads are ready for the workforce that we have here in Colorado? And when 3/4 of all jobs require some kind of education beyond high school in our state, then we should be giving students that education in high school. And so the blur question is just such an important one. We need to make sure that high school grads are ready to succeed in Colorado's economy. And part of how we do that is by making sure that every high school grad has some kind of college credit under the belt when they graduate, for a lot of reasons. Whether they go on to college or not, if they have that college experience, they know they can. They know that they are ready and able to do that kind of work. And so that in itself really helps to prevent a lot of the tracking that Rep. Bacon was referring to. We can't let that happen. It's not about some students do trades and some don't. If we can get them college credit in high school, they know they can succeed. If we can get them to fill out a FAFSA so they know they can afford it, then we're going to have more opportunities for folks across the economic spectrum to go to college and earn that 2 or 4 year degree and succeed here in Colorado's workforce.
Thank you.
Thank you. This next question is for all of you. As a college student, I've had to sleep in my car for about a week due to the lack of affordable housing near or around my university. Many of my peers, especially those from low-income and first-generation backgrounds, face similar challenges. These struggles make it hard to focus on school, much less plan for a better future. Will this legislature propose legislation supporting basic needs and additional support for students seeking higher education? You have 1 minute to answer. Representative Martinez, we'll start with you.
Absolutely. I think that that's something that we need to plan for. Again, when I went to school at a state institution at Adams State University, and the space limit was limited in availability for students, and especially those for local. So I think that we need to continue doing that, because I think that that also plays a bigger role into what students, again, can even go to college. You even look at the problem going into first-year teachers that are going in and teaching at these institutions that struggle to find housing as well too, and they may want to participate and join these institutions, but can't afford housing in there. So I think that still needs to be a priority, and being able to work on solutions is going to be better for the entire population.
Thank you. Representative Bacon?
Well, with just 1 minute. So, I do think in this state, we do not have a constitutional obligation to fund higher ed, but we need to start treating it like we do have that obligation. And as much as we've been talking about how much money, certain things cost and fully funding this, like we do have to talk about, again, our revenues. We know that there are students who would rather pay, because it's cheaper, out-of-state tuition for another university than being able to afford in-state tuition to Colorado universities. And the truth of the matter is we do need to support higher ed. And it's not just more money for more money's sake. When I talk in K-12 about the BS factor, 1989 matters because there are things that we pay for more now that we didn't pay for 30 years ago. Like we pay for laptops, which college students need. Housing costs have gone up. And as much as we want to talk about inflation, sure, we should be able to also talk about how much money we can support with higher ed so we can control tuition so people can use other dollars to pay for other things. And I do think that requires some investments from the state, because that money is money we will get back. The more people who complete university are the people who will pay into the system. And so it requires us to have a really honest conversation as well with taxpayers about how much money we have and what we want to invest in and what is the return on investment.
Thank you. Representative Garcia Sander?
Thank you. I'm sorry to hear about your plight. That's tough. I think, I guess I don't support a blanket piece of legislation, just mostly because I think what is necessary and maybe important at one university in Denver isn't necessarily going to be important or a priority at another university. And so I think, I think we need to look at what would fit the local area most. And I think there's some conversations that universities and colleges need to have around supporting their students that live in their local areas. So, I don't have a good answer. I have lots of questions, but I think we need to look at what are universities doing right now, and is it legislation that's the answer, or is it a university and local community question that needs to be answered?
Thank you. Senator Kirkmeyer?
So look, for the last 2 years, I've been fighting to make sure that we adequately fund the core basic minimum services that is needed for higher education. In 23, the governor was short about $65 million to fund higher education. Tuition would have gone up by 4, 5, 6, 7%. In 24, the governor came in, he was $110 million short for higher education, and tuition would have gone up by 6, 7, 8, 9%. This year, he's short again in higher education funding, and tuition will have to go up to like 7, 8, or 9%. We can't afford it. Kids can't afford that. Nobody can afford going up by 9%. We're already, what are we, 47th in the nation or something as a state as far as not funding our higher education institutions. I'm a huge proponent of education, whether it's K-12 or whether it's higher education. That's my priorities that I've talked about year over year for the last 3 years being on the Joint Budget Committee. It's about education, higher education, those provider rates that we have to fund over in Medicaid, and all provider rates across the board. Those are things that we just have to fund. So we can't fund everything. That's what I'm working on, to make sure that we fund higher education appropriately this year so that tuition spikes don't go up above 2 or 3%.
Thank you. Senator Bridges?
Thank you. And I think the tragedy is that your story is not unique. There's a lot of students who struggle to afford higher education in the state, but Senator Kirkmeyer was one of the sponsors of a great tax credit last year. I co-sponsored that makes it A lot of those other costs involved with education are covered by tax credits. Now, there are some structural issues with how those are rolled out that we're working on this year, trying to fix. But we want to make sure that, my goal is that students can graduate from college debt-free. That doesn't mean you don't pay anything, but depending on how much money you can bring, depending on what your FAFSA says, depending on what the colleges can give you, you ought to be able to graduate debt-free. And in Colorado right now, that is already true for students whose families make $65,000 a year or less, even without the tax credit that we passed. At every institution of higher education in Colorado, every public institution of education in higher Colorado, they all have their various promises, the CU promise, the Adams State promise, whatever, they all promise these things. And it amounts to a Colorado promise that if your family makes $65,000 a year or less, you get to go to higher ed for free. So yeah, and wraparound services are a part of that. Housing is a part of that.
Thank you. This question is for Representative Garcia Sander, Representative Bacon, and Senator Bridges. It is a question that several of our audience members had about school choice. After Amendment 80, what's next in the legislature for school choice in charter schools? You'll each have 1.5 minutes to answer. Representative Garcia Sander, we'll start with you.
That's a good question. Thank you. So I've actually always been an advocate for and a supporter of school choice. As a public school teacher and principal and district administrator, I know that public schools don't meet all kids' needs. There are some parents that I know that have had, they want their child to have a Montessori education, and we don't have a public school Montessori program, or core knowledge, maybe, specific programs for their kids. And Colorado has had school choice in law for a long time. And, as a teacher, I would have 25 kids in front of me. And, as much as I would try really hard to make sure that child had a Montessori type experience, and that child has a core knowledge type experience, and this child has a district regular program experience, I can't meet all kids' needs. And so, parents can choose different places for their kids, what meets their kids' needs best. We have lots of magnet programs, charter schools, and private and homeschool options if that's what parents choose. So, with Amendment 80 not passing, I don't know that changes a whole lot. That would have solidified school choice in the Constitution. But, we still have, it's a viable option. There are too many parents in Colorado that will not give up their school choice. And that includes just magnet programs within a district. That includes charter schools. And so I think that, it's too ingrained in our society in Colorado to give up school choice. And so I just see that, as being something that we necessarily keep. Thanks.
Thank you. Representative Bacon?
Thank you. I will say that I think Coloradans kind of made it clear how they feel about choice, and which includes just what it is that we fund, but also what it is that we already allow for in the state. And so, does every school offer every kid what they need? No, but that is not limited to public schools. That is also limited. Charter schools are public schools. It's also true for charter schools and private schools and even home schools. And so the role of the state is to say that if we're going to take taxpayer money, regardless of how you identify or how you learn, then the state should have an interest to be sure that all kids in this state, regardless of where you live, can actually graduate with an ability to function past that, and that public dollars are used to support kids just to do that, and not to necessarily get into a space of where we're also helping people pick, choose, decide what it is that they like or don't like about other people. And so I put that in there because that is a part of this conversation. We know communities want to form their own schools because they have their own ideals and values, but public dollars and public accountability require that that is inclusive. And so those are questions that we have. Again, we are a state where people are already choosing the type of school models that work for them. It has been relatively successful. We see a lot of data on choice. People tend to choose, when they're the littlest kids, tend to choose the schools closest to them regardless. Transportation is real. And so we need to just understand, again, our context and figure out how do we ensure as a state that dollars put into the pot by all people means that all of our kids, regardless of where they live, are ready. And we need to have appropriate accountability measures for that. So again, that's what we think about choice. When we say all these different entities, these are entities that we do or do not have touch points with common ideal learning goals, ideals, and values for all kids across Colorado. And that is what is at play. And I think that's what also showed up in the Amendment 80 conversation.
Thank you. Senator Bridges, and then we can get to Representative Garcia Senator.
Sure. So I opposed 80. And I think that is entirely consistent with my support of public school choice, because 80 would have, I think the way it was written, could have been construed to say that we need to fund private schools. And I don't believe in funding private schools. Charter schools are public schools. That's not a political statement. That's a statement of fact. Charter schools are public schools, and I believe in fully funding our public schools. I oppose expanding 529s to cover funding for private schools for the same reason. It's public money that goes to private schools if we allow that to happen, and that's not acceptable. So I oppose 80. I oppose using 529s for private schools in the K-12 space. That being said, the most important thing here, the reason that I support school choice within our public ecosystem, is because of kids. We need to make sure that kids, no matter where they come from, what their background is, they have the opportunity to succeed. I personally, myself, I used the choice options that we have in this state to go to Arapahoe High School instead of Heritage High School, because I would have driven right by Arapahoe on my way to Heritage. And yeah, I had a great experience. So, that was good for me. I think we got to trust that parents are going to be making the choices that are best for their kids. And we need to make sure that all of our public schools, whether they are magnet, whether they are traditional, whether they are charter, whatever they are, have the funding they need to succeed. And really importantly, charter schools in Colorado are different from charter schools in a lot of the rest of the country. They can't choose who they serve. If more kids apply to those schools than they have room for, they have to use a lottery system for who they pick. Only magnet schools get to choose who it is they take in. It is a different system in this state than we see in most of the rest of the country for our charter schools.
Thank you.
Can I just jump in? I just want to point out that Amendment 80 lost by only about 41,000 votes. And so I'm always cautious when people say whatever law amendment is a mandate, when it was 50.68 to 49.32. That's a pretty narrow margin for our state to vote on. And so I just want to point that out.
All right, so thank you all so much for this robust conversation. We're now going to move to audience questions. So first, I'd like to extend a thank you to Senator Kirkmeyer, who has to jump off a little bit early. So thank you so much for attending. And whenever you have to cut out, just cut out. Really appreciate your time here. And next, so we'll get to questions from Judy, Steve, and several others. A task force is calling for changes to how schools and districts are evaluated. What changes, if any, will be made to the state's accountability system? Representative Bacon and Representative Garcia Sander will ask you to answer this one first. So you'll each have 2 minutes.
I'm sorry, can you repeat? I didn't hear the first part of the question.
A task force is calling for changes to how schools and districts are evaluated. What changes, if any, will be made to the state's accountability system?
Oh, that's very interesting. So for those of you who may not have followed, there were a lot of topics put in there, and the accountability system, but frankly, it's just the way that the state can name also where the goals for kids, right, as they graduate. And so I do know some interesting conversations were about post-workforce readiness. There are a lot of districts that do that well, but that's not in any sort of accountability system. And we're not talking just about assessment, right? And so there were other conversations about assessment, which is in Colorado, we don't have graduation requirements per se, other than students have to demonstrate they are ready for a workforce after they graduate. And that's why we have CMAS, but that's also why we have capstone or the ABSFAB or any of those tests. So what we know we might see are additional avenues perhaps for any sort of post-workforce readiness evaluation. I do think we're looking at assessment and how much time assessment takes, and is that the only way to determine readiness? And then after that, I think we might have some ancillary conversations. For example, school climate. Is that something that we have to look at more deeply?
Representative Garcia Sander.
Okay, I'm going to go out on a limb, and I'm guessing that I might be the only person on this panel that's actually had to submit the reports as a school and as a teacher. You have also as a district. And so thank you, Bacon. So you know how much goes into it. You know, I in my current role in my district, I'm also responsible for compliance, Office of Civil Rights Compliance, and managing the multilingual department. And so I'm really accustomed to looking at data. And I also know that repeatedly I'm asked by the state of Colorado to turn in data over and over again, data that should be stored somewhere in some report that I've had to submit several times every year. And so, you know, I guess I don't have any recommendations yet. I'm going to wait and see what the task force comes up with, but I know I'm going to have a lot of questions around what's necessary. And again, I'll go back to rural schools and small school districts are often required to submit all of the same paperwork that often doesn't change a lot because our numbers are much smaller. So our data stays pretty static. But we're required to submit a lot of the same reports, and we don't have the personnel and the time allocated for all of these multiple reports to be submitted multiple times every year. So so I'll be asking a lot of questions and making sure that what's requested is absolutely necessary for accountability for our schools, because I don't think accountability is bad at all. But I do think that we do need to get a handle on the excessive paperwork and reporting requirements for, especially for small districts, rural schools.
So real quick, Senator Kirkmeyer and I have to jump. Representative CDE is working on that this year. They have a budget request to work on some sort of statewide data system, so you don't have to submit it 100 different times. The same, and it's bananas. So they're working on that. Unfortunately, we got to run for JBC reasons. But thank you all so much for having us.
Yeah,
Yes. I just want to ditto that. Thank you so very much. This is such an important conversation to be having and for everyone to be engaged in. And I feel very thankful and grateful that you allowed me to participate as well. So thank you.
Yeah, we've loved having you both. Thank you so much. I know JBC is a full-time job plus some, so thank you so much for making time for this.
Thanks.
This is a question from Ricardo. One of the biggest expenses for families, particularly young families, is childcare. What opportunities do you see to both increase the supply of high-quality childcare, especially for infants and toddlers, while also lowering the cost of care? We'll throw this question to Representative Bacon, Representative Martinez. You'll have 2 minutes to answer.
So my 20,000-foot view, and I might not be answering this question entirely, but I do want to say that I feel like as the state of Colorado, as the neighbors and taxpayers, we do need to talk about our revenues and how the state funds things, as well as what is the reality of living, let alone costs of living. And so, for example, while we heard like maybe we should fully fund K-12 first, you know, we still also hear from people who want to simultaneously cut property taxes, to which the state has to backfill. We have a state where people vote for the things that they want, like food for kids, right? That was a proposition, but there was also a proposition to spend $350 million in law enforcement. And so we have a world where our neighbors are talking about what we want and what we need, and they vote for it, but we're not also talking about actually how much money we have and how do we prioritize things. So in this bucket is a tax credit, right? It's the early childhood tax credit. We're talking about earned income tax credits. We're also talking about paying for the new Department of Early Childhood so we can have universal pre-K. And all of these questions to me really put on the table, what is it that Coloradans need and want? And how can we have an honest conversation about how we can support and pay for that? And if we don't want to pay for it with taxes or tax cuts, I get it. But then we need to have honest conversations then on how people need to make a livable wage. And we need to talk about what characteristics or circumstances or context, you know, narrows the income gaps. so that we don't have these problems. And so for, again, like we are in the place where we believe we need to provide early childhood education. We have created an office that has had its hiccups. We have provided tax credits, but we're doing so in a context that is restricted, that has not imagined these things, or we're doing so in a way where we are not talking about income inequality. We're not talking about livable wages and whatnot. And so this is the time, I think, you know, this $700 structural deficit is the time for us to say, maybe this is rock bottom, but we do need to hear from people on what it is we need to prioritize, what their circumstances are, and then readjust our statutes and laws to provide the goals and the outcomes that we say we want to provide.
Thank you. Representative Martinez?
You know, I really think that taking a look at this and, you know, echoing what Assistant Majority Leader Bacon was saying, is getting feedback, because I think a lot of times what I don't want pushing this forward is to have, you know, kind of this cookie cutter way of dealing with this, because childcare is going to look different in the rural parts of the state as it is in Denver. But, you know, obviously the need is still there across the board. But, you know, really looking at seeing what's going to make sense, and making sure that we're approaching this for those unique areas, and making sure that we're providing them the best options to being able to do what they need to do best. You know, I think that living in a rural area, the providers are very limited, and they're really centered around some of the bigger metro hubs, what we call metro hubs, but are still considered rural parts of the state. But I think that, again, getting their feedback too, and seeing what's there, because I think that also there's going to be some time for some overlap, and there's going to be the discrepancies between urban and rural. But I think also providing them so they can all be successful, I think, is really important, and something that we need to do, and quite frankly, can continue doing. And the other, I'll close with this, is that saying that I think having that conversation is more than just having a one-time conversation saying thanks for your feedback and then closing the door and then going to what you're doing. It needs to be continuous, and being able to adjust it and move with the times, and being able to continue to make improvements, and then that way they feel engaged with it as well.
All right. The next question is from several people, and they've asked a version of this. So the adequacy studies also called for the state to invest more in teachers and teacher pay. What can the state legislature do to help attract and retain teachers? Representative Garcia Sander and Representative Bacon will ask this question of you. You each have 2 minutes to answer. Representative Garcia Sander, go ahead.
So I've mentioned before, I work in a rural school district, and we have a huge challenge of attracting and retaining teachers. And I'll also say that when I was a principal in Poudre School District, there were years where I'd have 150 applications for a kindergarten teaching position. In more recent years, that number has plummeted. I supervised student teachers at UNC for a year. And when I was supervising, I would typically have 6 to 10 kids, students, I should say, 6 to 10 students to supervise as pre-service teachers every semester. And in the last few years, those cohorts have shrunk so much that they don't even really need a whole lot of extra supervisors. And so we have a dearth of teachers in our schools in Colorado, and I'm very stressed about that, because who's going to teach our kids if we don't have teachers? One of the ways that we've started to address that in my rural school district is working with our local BOCES, Centennial BOCES. We have programs where we create our own teacher pipeline with people who would like to pursue teaching. We get them enrolled with CBOCES and UNC or DU. I think DU, Metro State to pursue their teaching licenses. We have started to source our high school students actually as pre-service paraprofessionals, and thinking about how can we get them enrolled. And so right now we've got a student teacher. She's 21, and right out of high school, we hired her as a paraprofessional. And in her second year, she was long-term substitute teaching Spanish classes in our high school, because we didn't have a Spanish teacher. We couldn't find one to hire. And so as a 19, 20-year-old, she's teaching Spanish to our high schoolers. She's well on her way to getting her teacher licensure. And so, we need to do what we can to create our own pipelines in districts. And I'd like to find ways to make that easier for suburban and urban districts also.
Thank you for that. Representative Bacon?
Yeah, I think the teacher recruitment issue is professional and financial. And so, with the adequacy studies, again, the point of that is to demonstrate that our funding system right now is untenable. And even if we cut half of the budget, like if we don't fund HICPUF or DOC, we're still going to have these challenges. Colorado is still at the bottom of K-12 funding, which includes being able to pay teachers. I did teacher recruitment for a long time, especially with teachers of color. And low-income people are more likely, even though they have Pell and whatnot, to borrow for school, for living expenses, and to say that you need to come back out of school with $80,000 worth of debt and you make $35,000 a year is an actual challenge. And so we do need to think about our revenues, even as we cut taxes, the state backfill, it's the same amount of money. We need to think about, for me, I got a refund of $8 for the low cost of $8. I'd rather put that back in the pot to have a music teacher. You know what I mean? And so we need to have that conversation professionally. We are talking about how much time we do need to hold teachers accountable, to being sure that students have learned something. There's also been a time as a Black woman where people didn't care about what Black kids learned, right? But we also need to lift up and raise the profession of teaching to where teachers don't feel like they are teaching to a test or spending a third of their time on it. We need to be able to provide new flexibilities and figure out how to embolden and strengthen the profession at a livable wage. And so that is why we're having conversations around assessment. It is not because people don't think that we need to see if a student learned what they needed to learn at the end of fourth grade. It is about how it is impacting the profession and the time in the classroom. And so the good thing is, after the last 15 years, I think we put a lot of conversations to bed. I think we're at a different place on choice, for example, but we do need to look into 2025. If we're going to talk about post, secondary workforce readiness, we need to then figure out who knows how to do that. What is it that kids and professionals are interested in, and then provide professional avenues in a way for them to pursue that.
Thank you. This question is from Andrea. Are there plans for any legislation related to the use of artificial intelligence in schools? Representative Martinez and Representative Bacon, we'll ask you. You'll have 2 minutes each.
I know that we had some legislation this past year in regards to AI and in the broader sense and being able to really start that regulation process. I have not seen anything in regards to AI in school districts, but if I was a betting man, I'd say that I think that that's an area that there is going to be more legislation on, just because I think that it's so new. There's so many working pieces to this. I can imagine that this is going to come to the forefront if it not this year, then in the next few years, just because of the, I believe that there's enhancements that can definitely happen in with classrooms, but then there's also areas that I do believe that there needs to be some regulation on in regards to how it fits in the learning environment, how it interacts with the teaching, and the teachers and also assignments as well too.
There have been conversations in AI, primarily in K-12, on data collection and data, and in conjunction with conversations on facial recognition and security and due process. So I just want to put that flag out there that that's happening. In regards to instruction, we are watching what's happening in higher ed. K-12 is still kind of analog in the sense that a kid has to be present and might actually have to write things. And so we're still looking at how to differentiate the use of AI, perhaps like ChatGPT in writing a paper, and how to support K-12 teachers in understanding cues of if a student wrote this or if AI wrote it, and then how do you assess what they know, which is may be off a paper. So for example, doing an oral exam, you can't ChatGPT that while you're standing in front of a teacher. But in higher ed, I sit on the WICHE board, which is like Western states looking into this. There is a robust conversation going on there and figuring out, again, how do you adjust instruction. But AI is also popping up in supplemental help, having programs that can figure out where kids are at and giving them proper tutoring materials. In those conversations, we're trying to track what are those algorithms? Does it steer kids or does it broaden things for kids? And then again, we're also trying to track what kind of data is collected and what that means and all of the Fourth Amendment stuff. And I'm a lawyer nerd, and that's another panel. So those are the ways that we're talking about AI in K-12 right now.
Thank you both for that. We will have two more questions, and they'll come from me, but this one is from both Sarah and Kristen. Considering the governor's agenda to use funds for the BEST program, how will legislators ensure there is funding for new facilities and also for the upkeep of aging buildings across the state? Is there a way to move beyond the BEST program and fund capital projects in a different way? We'll throw this one to Representative Martinez and Representative Garcia Sanders, since you both are in rural areas.
Well, first and foremost, I'll state that the BEST grant program has been absolutely beneficial to the rural areas. Most of the school districts in my area in the San Luis Valley and in Pueblo have all benefited from the BEST grant program and being able to build their schools. That being said, I think that also the additional cost that wasn't figured in when we started this, and just through time, is maintenance of those buildings and being able to continue to make sure that we keep those facilities updated. I think that that there's definitely room for conversation in regards to that, and moving into a different funding source for this, but being able to provide the schools with what they need. But I think that overall positive benefit from these schools, because a lot of them hadn't been updated in a long time, and I'm talking 60, 80 years being able to do that because the school districts couldn't afford it. But I also want to make sure, again, circling back, is saying that with the maintenance cost of this, because I think making sure that the school districts can still afford to being able to do preventative maintenance on this, make sure that those buildings last as long as possible, and being able to continue to improve and doing what's best for those individual school districts.
Thanks for the question. So yes, I concur with what Rep. Martinez just said, and same as in my district. My husband actually was a teacher for a while, and his district built an entire new school with BEST grant money. A conversation that's come up a lot in my district lately is what happened to all the pot tax money that's supposed to come to our schools, and why aren't we all getting the maintenance and the facilities that we need? And so I don't know. I've started reading a little bit about it, and I have lots of questions. But I do want to pursue, how much money is going into the BEST grants, and is it? I know that there are schools that are applying for it for both maintenance and for new builds, but can we tap a little bit more of that marijuana tax money to go into BEST, because it's not all going there. And I know a lot of people voted to support that tax based on, it's going to help build schools. And so I'd like to dig into that a little bit more.
All right, thank you both. And this last question is actually one that I wanted to get to earlier, but I was a little bit worried about time. So, Representative Matthew Martinez, as you have been champion of access to higher education for incarcerated people in Colorado, what are the challenges in expanding this access, and what can you do to support more access to higher education in prison as we move forward?
I'm so glad that you asked this question. So I think that what we're seeing is, and we've done what we need to do in Colorado to being able to improve access, at least, that first couple steps there. I think really the bigger problem that's arising out of this is with the federal government and how Pell Grants are accessed for the incarcerated population. And I think there was a lot of talk, for 2 years on how this program looks. And the initial product, just like anything else, needs some fine tuning to being able to make sure that it makes sense. And I think a lot of where this is that it's based off of a full-time student and being able to receive full Pell Grant funding. But for an incarcerated student taking full 12 semester hours inside of a normal semester timeframe period while incarcerated is difficult. And what you'll see is they'll do a class here, in shortened timeframes, but that also adjusts how much funding that they can use. And I think the biggest thing that we're looking at now, at least from reports back from the institutions, is this requirement to be a certified prison education program. It's still really vague, and so there's still some There's still some processes that have been hashed out within in the last 6 months, but I think having a more clear process for schools that have been doing this, doing the program well and providing quality education to incarcerated students, I think is there. But I think also, it needs to be a little bit more streamlined and being able to be more open for students, and again, allowing them to pick what institution they want to go through. And then I'll close with this, as I think the bigger piece that I would like to see is an expansion of both in-person and online courses inside the facilities, and that way it gives not only the facilities the wiggle room to being able to provide for their students, but also for the students, giving them options on what's going to work best for them, and being able to really pick the degree field, the certificate program that benefit them the most, and what's going to benefit them on the outside.
All right. Thank you all so much. A big thank you to all of the lawmakers who were in attendance today. And thank you to the audience for attending today's event. Be on the lookout for a survey when you exit. It'll take you 2 minutes and really help us better understand what makes a great virtual event. Once again, special thanks to our event sponsor, the Colorado Education Association, and thanks to our event partner, Young Invincibles. And a really huge thank you to our co-moderator, William. You did an amazing job. Thank you for those personal questions and being here today. An overview of this event and a recording will be available on chalkbeat.org this week. Thank you again for joining us, and don't forget to sign up for Chalkbeat Colorado's newsletter if you don't subscribe. We'll keep you informed this legislative session. Have a great rest of your Monday. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much for hosting.